Welcome, everybody. I'm so happy that you're here with me tonight. This evening, we're talking about less policing and more parenting, how to improve your child's executive function skills without all the arguments. My name is Ann Dolin, and for the past 24 years, my coaches, executive function coaches, tutors, and I have been helping students to improve their grades and confidence and their executive function skills as they go throughout their school career. I started as a Fairfax County public school teacher, and on the side, I would drive to kids' homes and tutor them one-to-one. And I realized after a few years that that was really my calling in life. So in 1998, I started Educational Connections, and here we are now, having helped over 10,000 students throughout the metropolitan Washington, D.C. area. So before we get started on the content, I would love to know, what grade level is your student in? And if you could throw that in the chat, that would be terrific. So just go to the chat and type in the grade level of your student. Thank you. Now let's see what we have. All right. So we have a 9th grader, an 11th grader, a 10th grader, a 9th grader, and a 5th grader. Glad you're here for the 5th grader too. A 10th grader, Chuck says a 5th, 6th, and 10th grader, a 6th, a 9th, and 8th, 7th, 10th, 12th, 9th, 7th, and 12th, and 8th and 10th grader. Okay, awesome. So it looks like we have kids across the spectrum, which is great. So we'll tailor this towards obviously our high school students, but I'll throw in a few things there for those of you that have middle schoolers too. You know, as I mentioned, my tutors and coaches and I have been working with kids for a long time. And now more than ever, do we see that things have changed in the field of education. So when parents call our office looking for academic help for their kids, here's what we often hear them saying. Focusing is such a battle with so many distractions. I'm really frustrated with my child. Sometimes parents will say, I'm worried he won't be able to keep up. If it's like this now in 9th grade with such difficulty with focus and finishing, what's it going to be like in 11th grade? And pretty much every parent I talk to is worried about the future. What's college going to be like? Will he be able to handle it in college? Sometimes parents report, I have to stay on top of them to get anything done. And I don't want to do that with a high schooler. And then sometimes parents will say, I've got 2 other kids. She's not my only one. Now, on the flip side, here's what parents are saying, or what kids are saying, excuse me. I've got this. Don't worry. Mom, don't micromanage me. I'll do it eventually. I promise I'll turn it in. I really will. Does any of this sound familiar in your household? I'd love to hear. If it does, say yes or say no in the chat. Anything sound familiar with what you're hearing? Kids that avoid, procrastinate, wait until the last minute. We hear a yes. Somebody said no. Yes, 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 yes. All right, well, you come to the right place because that's what we're going to tackle tonight. Now, it's easy to think that when we have kids that struggle with these things, like basically focusing and finishing, so that execution piece of it, and then turning their work in and ultimately getting the grades that their cognitive level is capable of doing. When we see our kids have problems in these areas, it's easy to think maybe they're lazy, they're unmotivated. Perhaps it's just that they don't like school. And maybe that can be the case every now and then. However, if you've seen this as a chronic problem, so not just something that's cropped up like this year, but you've seen it over time, it's likely that there's something else going on. And these issues could be rooted in something called executive functions. Now, executive function skills are these cognitive abilities behind the frontal lobe of your brain, and they're super important for school success. And what's interesting about these executive function skills is that this is actually the last part of the brain to develop. So as kids' brains mature when they're really young, the back part of the brain develops first, and as they age, development comes into the frontal lobe. And the frontal lobe is actually the last part to develop. And so sometimes we see that some kids have really great executive function skills, like they're on time, they turn their work in on time, they start early, they ask for help, they can kind of see ahead and they plan, whereas other kids struggle with these things. Now, as it turns out, there's actually 8 executive function skills. So let me touch on each one of them really quickly. And then for tonight's purposes, we're going to hone in on the 3 that are really critical for academic success. So the first one is called inhibition, which is a fancy word for just like avoiding distractions. So if you're doing something online and your cell phone beeps, can you put that aside and not pay attention to it for just a minute or two while you finish what you're doing online? That's inhibition. Initiation is starting a task. And the key to this is starting it even when you don't want to do it, because anybody can start something that they love to do. Next, planning and organization. If you say have 3 things to do, can you plan them in order? I'm going to do this, that, and the other thing. And can you stay organized enough to get them done? Next, we have self-monitoring. And actually, interestingly, this is the last executive function skill to come online. This is the hardest one for kids. Self-monitoring is just another term for self-awareness. So for example, if you find yourself going down the rabbit hole of distractions and watching YouTube videos for an hour, can you say to yourself, this is not a good idea. I need to stop watching videos and start working on my history assignment. Next, working memory. Now, working memory isn't actually short-term. It's not long-term memory. It's your ability to juggle multiple things in your head. We see it a lot in math and writing if kids have difficulty with it. So for example, in writing, it means, so you've got to write this essay. Do the sentences flow correctly? Am I really supporting my thesis statement? Do I have the words spelled correctly? Is my grammar okay? How about my punctuation? All those things are swirling in your head when you're writing. That's working memory. Shifting, putting down one thing, starting another. Materials organization. 5-10 years ago, this was binders, this was backpacks, this was folders. Now it's all digital files. Can your child keep things organized digitally? And lastly is emotional control. This is also an executive function. Can your student do these things without breaking down in tears or having, a meltdown, a drama attack? Can they do these things while keeping it together? So often when I share executive functions with parents, sometimes they'll say, oh, well, does this kind of sound like a problem with attention? Is this kind of like ADHD? And let me just explain, because a lot of parents have this question, how they're all related and interconnected. First, many people call it ADD, but actually that's not the term anymore. That went out the door in the 80s. The correct term right now is called ADHD, which stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. And there's actually 3 types. There's hyperactive, which is fidgety, impulsive kids. There's inattentive. Often we see this more in girls. They're not always paying attention, but they're never a behavior problem. They kind of fly under the radar screen. And then there's the combined type. So here's what we know. Everybody with ADHD has weak executive function skills, but not everybody with weak executive function skills meets the diagnostic criteria of ADHD. To me, it doesn't matter. If your child is struggling with these things, with weak executive function skills, you want to take action. You want to support them as best you can. And here's why. Because without any support, and if we let this linger on and kids not doing, as well as they can in school, the cycle of negativity takes over. And here's what that looks like. It's kind of like, I call it a doom loop. First, the student gets a bad grade. Then, or maybe there's just some negative behavior like procrastination. What happens then with either a negative behavior or a bad grade? Criticism from others, like parents, maybe the teacher, perhaps it's a sports coach. That results in lowered confidence. That in turn produces reduced effort. So for many kids, when they don't have the confidence, they put forth even less effort. And then the cycle starts all over again. Negative behavior or bad grade, criticism from others, lowered confidence, reduced effort and motivation. And then we have the loop. So we don't want this for our kids. This evening, I'm going to share with you 7 strategies for planning and productivity. These are strategies we work with our students on all the time, because even when kids just say they need a calculus tutor or a biology tutor or a 9th grade English tutor, it's typical that they also need help in planning ahead and studying. Those are keys to success, not only in middle school, obviously, but high school and absolutely college. So we're going to discuss the 3 strategies for structures, the little things that you can implement at home. We'll talk about 4 strategies for focusing and finishing. And then lastly, and I personally think probably most importantly, we'll talk about conversation starters and how to ask powerful questions so that you can open the lines of communication with your child and have a good relationship over academics. So let's start first with some things you can do at home. One of the easiest things I can recommend is something called a Sunday session. And a Sunday session is just basically a time you're going to meet with your kids on Sundays, ideally, to take a look at the week ahead. And I often share with kids, and actually it's interesting because when I looked at all of our sessions with students, that Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, those are always the most popular days of the week. And for this reason, because we often share with kids, okay, look, when it comes to the most important day of the week, it's not Monday, it's not Tuesday, it's not Wednesday, it's not Thursday, definitely not Friday. It's Sunday, because Sunday gives you time to look ahead at your week and figure out what's going on. And you can use this time in the same way, where you preview the week with your child and you say, hey, let's talk about the week ahead. So you could do this over Sunday dinner if you have a family dinner on Sunday, or maybe say 7 o'clock on Sundays, you set aside a few minutes just to have a discussion about the week. So during this time, you're going to preview the schedule. So you might ask your child what they have coming up. So that's a time when they can open up their laptop and look at Schoology, or if you have a child on another LMS, and you can say, do you have anything big coming up this week? Any big projects, tests, things that you maybe could work a little bit on now, chip away at now, so you're ready for the week. The reason this is important is that kids with weak executive function skills do not naturally plan ahead. They do things at the last minute. So by doing this on Sunday, they're preparing for the week ahead. So they go to school on Monday organized. They know what's going to come up, instead of just showing up on Monday, which they typically do, and they're already behind. And for that reason, we found that this idea of previewing to help kids figure out what they have. And one other reason our early week sessions are popular is because we'll take a look. What do you have coming up this week? Oh, you have a test on Friday. What might be the steps for studying for that? How can you break that down? Or they have a project, and we'll help kids take that big thing that they have due and calendar it, basically chunking it into smaller pieces and putting it on their calendar. So like a little to-do for them. And what we found over the years is using the calendar for kids is a better resource than making lists. They tend to do better on their calendar with their tasks than making lists. All right, so just asking kids, tell me about your week ahead. And if you don't want to talk about academics, it's fine. You can talk extracurriculars. It's the same idea. You're looking ahead. Oh, tell me about your practices this week. What do you have going on? Number 2, choose a start time. That means about what time will your child start their work after school, their homework? And in fact, there's lots of times kids can start homework. They can do it, for little kids, if you have an elementary schooler, right after school or after about a 30-minute break. But for older kids, for high school kids, usually before they go to the practice, right after they get back from practice, before they have dinner, right after they have dinner, those are ideal times. But what often happens is kids start their work too late. They start it before bed. And when that happens, that causes them to be up really late at night. So often as parents, we get upset with our kids because they're staying up too late, and we're often focused on the end time. But what I found is it's better to focus on the start time. That often sets kids up for more success. So asking, what time might you start this? Is there any way it could begin a little bit earlier? Is there something small you can do to get started? Those are all good questions. The other way we can set up structure at home is determine where the work is going to be done. And what I found is that before the pandemic, kids were generally more structured. So they'd like have a desk that they did their work. And they were generally, had a place to do it. During the pandemic, that place became their bed. And then that became under the covers with their laptop in a little cozy ball with blankets on top of them, which isn't really conducive to focus. So if they do homework in their room, I would recommend making sure that they have a cleared off desk so that they have a place to do their homework. And it's, not only always going to be that they'll be sitting at the desk, but it should be an option for them, because there's lots of research that shows sitting at a desk with your feet on the floor and your back on the back of a chair is much more helpful for attention and even for writing and fine motor skills. And if you have a child that does better in the hum of a busy area, like they might want to do their homework, in the family room or in the kitchen or at Starbucks, consider noise canceling headphones. Those tend to work really well for kids with ADHD or weak executive function skills that really do thrive in a busy area, but some still need some semblance of quiet. Ultimately, what we work on for kids is to really be a detective. Like your job in middle school is to figure out how you study best, where you learn best, what time of day you learn best. So when you go to high school, you can practice these things. And if you don't know this in high school, this is still your job. What kind of notes are better for me when I take notes in class? Am I better drawing pictures? Am I better with a Cornell notes taking system? Do I tend to work better at around 5 o'clock? Is earlier or later better? How do I study best? Should I study with a friend? Should I annotate what I need to do? Should I use a study guide in a different way? These are all important questions for high schoolers to be ready for college. So what I found is just working with students and asking questions, and then also that concept of previewing is super helpful for them. But at no time have I found that executive functions are the most taxed for high schoolers is when they go to apply to college. And often as parents, we think, well, if you really wanted to go to college, you would open up the Common App and you would work on your essay and you would do all these things on your own. But the reality of it is these things are really, really difficult for kids. And there's so many moving parts of the application process that we found a lot of benefit to helping kids through the process and starting early. And so for that reason, I've created college checklists for each grade level so that you can see what my child needs to be doing when they're a freshman, when they're a sophomore, when they're a junior, and if they haven't finished the application process, things that they can still be doing when they're a senior. And so this helps kids to preview what they have coming up. It allows you to feel less stressed by starting the discussion early. And you can get this by texting the number 55444 and the word college, and it will come straight to your inbox. All right, so we've talked about a few things when it comes to executive functions. We've talked about this concept of a Sunday session and helping kids to think ahead. We've talked about starting a little bit earlier so they're not up so late. And we talked about having a place for kids to do work. Let's discuss next some other issues like procrastination, focusing, and getting kids to just complete their work and to turn in what they've done. All right, so I want to start by discussing why teenagers procrastinate in the first place and the research behind it. And it's so interesting because procrastination actually gets worse until college, and then it seems to level off and get better. So because we know it gets worse in college, likely because there's so much unstructured time, and in high school, it's much more structured. We want our kids to develop the skills and have a few tools in their back pocket. So if they get themselves into a bind in college, they have ways of getting around it. And by the way, 50% of kids, high schoolers and college students say that procrastination is impacting their grades. So it's a real issue. And we know that it creates lots more stress and drama, lots more stress and anxiety, and it actually results in lower grades. So we would think, if this isn't such a great thing, why do kids do it in the first place? Why do adults do it in the first place? And as parents, we automatically think it's the first reason. Well, Jimmy knows how to do it. He just doesn't want to do it. But actually, the majority of students procrastinate because for one reason or another, they feel overwhelmed and underprepared. They want to do the work, but they just can't muster the energy. It feels overwhelming to them, and they don't know if they have the skills to effectively get it done well. And then the last reason, and this is in our practice, the biggest growing group of kids we see, they're perfectionists. They're really anxious. They want to do a great job, but they put it off. They avoid it because it feels so difficult. And they're worried that if it's not perfect, why bother? If it's not going to be an A, I'll do it later when I feel better. The problem is they never really feel better. And so it just continues to be avoided. And that's just the brain's natural reaction. Your brain is always in self-preservation mode. If your brain senses this is scary, it's too hard, it's overwhelming, maybe you're underprepared, like, let's find something more fun to do. And that's often how kids get into the trap of digital distractions. So the question is, if kids have all these issues, how can they help themselves to get started, especially if they know how to do it, but they just can't muster the energy? And one of the ways is to use a timer. This is a way to help kids get started. So for the kids that don't have that internal oomph, I recommend getting a physical timer. I like physical timers just because if you have your phone, it's just so easy to see a text message strand and get involved in it. So a physical timer can be like this. I personally love this timer. It kind of looks juvenile, but I've used it for college students and they love it. It's called a time timer. So the red floating disc just moves. So one of the strategies we teach the kids is, okay, your brain hates change. You're going to trick your brain and you're only going to set it for 5 minutes. So you set it for 5 minutes and you say, I'm going to work as hard as I can, best as I can, focus as much as I can, just for 5 minutes. And when the timer goes off, I can take a break or keep on going. Typically, they can keep on going. So set it for 5 minutes. We call this 5 minutes of fury, maybe the tolerable 10. Anybody can tolerate anything for 10 minutes. Or if you want to be fancy, take your age and add 1. And that gives you like a short baseline to get started. But the reality is that most high school students, once they get started, it's also continuing to focus to get the work done. So if that's a problem for your child and they need to study in broader swaths of time to get complicated work done, for example, AP, IB, or dual enrollment classes, I would recommend that they use something called a Pomodoro technique. And the Pomodoro technique is actually developed by an Italian researcher in the 80s. And he coined it the Pomodoro technique because he did his research using a tomato timer. And in Italian, tomato means Pomodoro. So he wanted to know, what is that sweet spot for attention? How long can people pay attention without losing motivation? Is it 10 minutes? Is it a half hour? Is it an hour? Is it 90 minutes? And what he found is that it's actually 25 minutes. And he also found that in these chunks of 25 minutes, the human brain can only tolerate 4 chunks of them. So let me explain what this looks like in reality, in real life. You would set the timer for 25 minutes, and then you would take a 5-minute break, and then you would set it again and take a break. So here's how it looks. Pomodoro, break, Pomodoro, break, Pomodoro, break, Pomodoro. Now, for some people with executive function weaknesses or ADHD, they might only do one Pomodoro and take a 5-minute break. Or perhaps they do 2 Pomodoros. But we know that the brain can't tolerate any more than that. And for many students, just getting 2 Pomodoros done is a big deal and can really help them tackle their work. So let's shift gears a little bit and discuss ways to help our kids to focus and finish using apps. And what I would recommend and what we use with students in kind of this detective work that we do, and basically in this detective work, we're working on academics, like we might be helping them with writing or other skills, but along the way, we're weaving in some of these things. And one of them is ways in which technology can really be helpful. And so all of these are part of a family of apps called website blockers. There's lots of them out there. These are just a few that are popular. So Stay Focused is a Chrome extension, Self-Control is from Mac, and Focus Booster is actually based on 25-minute increments using the Pomodoro method. So basically, kids can blacklist or whitelist the websites they don't want to go to or want to go to and set a timer for 25 minutes or however long they want so that they stay focused on their work while they're on their laptop. And during that time, they can try to disable the app, restart their computer. They won't be able to get to those websites. So this is a tool kids can use, again, going back to that self-awareness part that we talked about in the beginning, if they find they're really distracted while online. Similarly, there's one for phones called Forest. And a lot of kids use Forest. It's very popular. Same deal. You set a timer for a specific amount of time. And if you look at the left, you can see the tree, and then you can see that green circle around the edge. And so that represents where in time the student is. So for example, when somebody presses Forest, that tree in the circle pops up on their screen and they can move the dial for how long they want to pay attention. That means that they're not going to go to Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok. They're focused on what their work is, and their phone is less of a distraction. And during that time, if they go to TikTok, for example, while they should be focused and not on other apps of their phone, they'll get a warning. And if they don't get out of TikTok, their tree will wither and die. Nobody wants a dead tree. You want your tree to grow to fruition during the time you set so you can plant it in your forest. And this is really, really motivating to kids. So we've talked a lot about different strategies for kids that just don't want to get started or that feel overwhelmed. Let's talk a little bit about the perfectionist kids. And for those kids, often when they have a lot of assignments to do, they feel easily overwhelmed and they start to avoid. And so what I found to be most successful with these students is to help them boil down their to-do list into something that's far more actionable. And for that reason, we use the must do, should do, could do strategy. So we'll have kids go through their list and we ask, what is a big part of your grade and actually needs to get done tonight? Let's categorize that as a must do. The should do's are things that, yeah, you should do them, but if you don't, it's okay because they're not due the next day. Could do's are things that are kind of nice to haves, but if you didn't do them, it's not the end of the world. Kind of like, oh, you know what? You already studied for an hour for that biology quiz. Do you really need to study for another hour? Maybe not. And you can take that off your list. So now it's much more actionable. You just have must-dos on your list. Along with all of these strategies, perhaps the most important one is encouraging kids to ask for help. And again, it's something we hope that kids mastered in middle school, but it's likely they didn't, but that they need to master in high school so they can ask for help in college when there will be no hand-holding. And what I found is that managing time on kids' own and communicating with teachers are probably the two most essential skills for high schoolers to have. So here's an example of an email a student wrote to a teacher asking for help. Dear Mrs. Smith, Good morning. I am writing to you about my essay on democracy. When I log into Schoology, it shows as submitted. However, it has now been more than 2 weeks and there is no grade associated with this assignment. Please let me know if something is missing or you need me to resubmit my essay. Thanks for your time, and I will see you in class this afternoon. Now, you might be thinking, let me tell you something. My kid would never write an email like that. And I'm with you. Most kids won't if left to their own. So if we as parents say to our kids, why don't you ask your teacher? Go meet with your teacher, stay after school, ask for help. The pleasers will say, yeah, I'll do that, but they won't. But other kids will just say, and they won't do anything. So here's how we found the best way to get kids to ask for help. We have a template. And I love this template. It's super helpful because it's basically fill in the blank. And when kids have this, they can easily ask for help for their teacher. Dear teacher's name, good morning or good afternoon or whatever it is. Please indicate a friendly greeting. So here's when you're going to say, it was great to see you in class yesterday or something nice. Then I am writing to you about blank. Here's where you're going to describe your problem and let the teacher know if you've taken any action already. Then please let me know what else you can do to follow through. Thanks for your time. I will see you in class whenever that is. And then your name. And so this type of thing is really great for kids to be able to be advocates for themselves. So next steps, what I would recommend is that in working with your child, I would just choose one thing. If something clicks with you tonight and you're thinking, you know what, maybe that Sunday session sounds good. And I'm going to try to just ask my child what their week looks like. Perfect. Choose one thing to start. The reality is some kids are open to our overtures and some will not. And some kids listen better to somebody else. So know when to outsource, know when to delegate these things. If you're worried that your child needs these skills and doesn't quite have them, and you're also worried that they may not have them by the time they go off to college. So when it comes to outside help, there's lots of benefits. Certainly, increased independence with your child, getting you out of the equation so you can be a mom, dad, a guardian, and not have to worry about academics. But it also provides skills and accountability to the students. So when we work with kids with executive functions, we work with them in two ways. And this is generally how any outside help works. Executive function coaching is when an instructor will just work on executive function skills. So for example, I mentioned this concept of calendaring before. So, okay, what do you have? Let's take a look at your calendar. What are the big things you have coming up? And helping kids break that big task down into smaller manageable chunks and put it onto their calendar. That's an example of executive function coaching. But sometimes kids need a little bit of both. They might need, a chemistry tutor with a little bit of executive function, specifically how to study for chemistry tests or how to study for math, which a lot of kids don't know. They think in math, you either know it or you don't. That's all there is to it. Not true. There are specific ways to study for math. So sometimes it's kind of all meshed together. And it works with resistant kids. So even if your child says, I don't want any help, or I don't know, this doesn't sound like a good idea, what I found is all about the relationship. So finding someone who can develop a great rapport with your child that they enjoy working with is key. Now, at home, if you want to tackle this at home, what I would encourage you to do is to start with a conversation. So you might say, can we talk tonight after dinner? How is 7:30? For example, you want to start asking about the week ahead. Don't just spring it on your kid on Sunday night. Open up the dialogue before then, or ask, or say, let's talk tonight after soccer practice. Does that sound good to you? Here are some conversation starters. I personally love using the words I've noticed. I've noticed they're kind of like magical words because when we say, like, if we see our child's falling behind and we look at Schoology and they have 5 missing assignments, it's really easy to say, oh my gosh, I cannot believe you have 5 missing assignments. What are you thinking? Why haven't you turned these in? It feels very punitive. But on the other hand, if you say, I've noticed it's hard to stay on top of things, you're just observing the observable. You're not passing judgment. Or if they're having difficulty with, say, algebra 2, you might say, I've noticed algebra is really hard. Tell me about this. And whenever you use I've noticed, all you want to do, or even when you just bring something up, your goal is to earn trust, to listen to your child, not to pass judgment and solve the problem. They don't need that. It's just to listen, to nod, and to empathize. Oh, you know what? I get it. Algebra is a hard subject. I can see why it's difficult. I understand. On an ongoing basis, we want to ask powerful questions instead of telling kids what to do. So, for example, a common question we ask kids when they come home is, do you have homework? Which is always yes, but sometimes kids will say no. Instead, one way to fire up kids' executive function skills is to ask, what's the one thing you need to get accomplished? If you were only to do one thing today that would make you feel great, if you checked it off your to-do list, what would that be? So it's making kids kind of think ahead a little bit. Oh, well, I have like a bunch of things to do, but my most important, well, it's definitely chemistry. Even though they may not say it's chemistry, I've got this lab to finish, it's still going to get those wheels churning in their head so that they're thinking about it. Here are some more powerful questions. Instead of, did you study for your science test? You might ask, what's the first thing you might do to get ready for that? Taking something big like studying into something small, like one little thing to get started. You better start that history project, young lady. What's something small you can do to get started on that history project? In general, we found over the years that why questions are not really conducive to good conversation. So if we say things like, why did you get a C on your history test? Or why haven't you turned that in? Or you've had 2 weeks to do that. Why haven't you started yet? Those questions are actually really difficult for people to answer. So why haven't you started that yet? Well, let's see. I forgot about it until yesterday, but then I had football practice and I came home and I was really too tired. They're not going to tell us all that. So why questions? They're difficult for kids. They actually do require a lot of critical thinking. And often kids will just walk away from us. They'll disengage or there will be lots of conflict. So I would suggest replacing those why questions with looking forward instead of back. So instead of why didn't you turn that assignment in, you might say, do you have anything coming up in science? Or instead of, I don't understand how you can already have missing assignments early in the quarter, you might say, I noticed there are some missing assignments. What's your first step to tackling them? And I've put all this together because I really do think communication is key with our kids into a handout for you. And you can get this by texting the same number, 55444, and the word communication, and it will come straight to your inbox. You can have a capital C, a lowercase c, it doesn't matter, just communication. And that will include the email template for advocacy and also all of the powerful questions for you. In just a second, I'm going to go to the chat for questions. So if you have a question, now would be the perfect time to pop it into the chat. All right, so as we wrap up, I must say that all these things are easier said than done. We can expect glitches along the way. It's just part of being a parent. We think we have it figured out and it's different the next day. But what we can control is keeping it positive. And so here's my challenge to you. It's actually the 30-day challenge. This could even be the 10-day challenge or the 7-day challenge. It doesn't really matter. But here's the idea that you focus on one good thing every day about your child. And it can be so small, it doesn't matter. Oh, I love the way you hung your jacket up on the hook. What a great idea to get started before you go to practice. That gives you more time to finish your homework. I love the way you put the dishes in the sink for me. Thanks so much for doing that. Any good thing, notice it. At the end of the day, I believe our job is to preserve relationships with our kids. That's the most important thing. And all the other stuff can be outsourced or delegated. So I hope you found this to be helpful to you. I will leave you with my contact information. If I can be of service, if you would like to talk to one of our program managers about your child's needs, hold up your phone. You can scan this QR code. And then here is all my contact information, my phone number, and my email. I'm most accessible on email and at ectutoring.com. All right, so we're going to go to Q&A in just a second. I'll see if we have any questions, and if not, we'll wrap up. All right, so I'm going to switch to my next screen. Oh, and by the way, after we do Q&A, I have a survey that will pop up on your screen. And if you could be so kind as to take the survey for me, that would be super helpful, and I would very much appreciate it. All right, so let's see. How do we get the college checklist? So take your phone and in your text and text the number 55444, and then type in the word college, and you'll get a text response that says, thanks so much. What is your email? And then once we have that, we'll email you the college checklist, and they'll be sent right to your inbox. So thank you for that question. Other people often ask, is this recorded? And the answer is yes. Tomorrow, I will send you a follow-up with all the information from this evening into it, along with the recording of this webinar and some other information for you. So I hope that's helpful. All right, well, it doesn't look like we have any other questions this evening. So I hope this was helpful to everybody who attended. It was a pleasure to meet all of you and to present to you tonight. I wish you all the very best for the remainder of the school year. Thank you so much for having me at McLean High School. Have a great evening, everybody. Good night. Bye-bye.